Hello out there. Uh, from me, Stacey Sanderson, thank you for tuning in. It has probably been a few weeks since I've come in to record anything between the ice storm we had in our area and then getting sick with a cold. And I think, like many of us, just navigating the weird energy that is this month of April. I've said a couple of times that I feel like April is testing us, testing our resilience, testing our fortitude. Um, as a therapist, I don't think I've ever experienced such a discouraging time in terms of inquiries and people following through with requests to start therapy. But nonetheless, we come back, we pick it up, and we do whatever we do because we want to help people. And that's why I am here today. A big part of why I do this is to offer up information, knowledge, perhaps even wisdom about narcissism, mental health, personality disorders, and relationships that are informed by research, experience, and a rich understanding of the things that connect us. With all of that being said, I will set up what it is that I am going to talk about today. And I've resisted this one um, because it's a bit complex. And I'm both too close to it and out of my depths, if that makes sense. But what I am going to talk about today is the difference between autism and narcissism. I, like most mental health professionals, struggle with the term autism. I come from a generation and have training that offers a slightly different grounding and understanding than how we commonly understand it today, and I own that. I do, however, prefer the term autism spectrum, of course, over the term Asperger's, just because of the historical meaning of that term and the association with Hans Asperger, which in our current climate, not ours, but in the as Canadians, but in the United States, you may want to research what that name means. But with all of that being said, it is not uncommon for there to be the conversation with clients about the similarities and differences of autism spectrum related issues or neuroatypicality, if that's a word, and narcissism. Now, first of all, I 100% think all of the personality disorders are much more a pervasive disorder or a developmental disorder than how they are mapped out and explained in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatric Disorders. I do think that they develop very similarly to many mental health problems that begin in childhood. They may manifest a little differently, but I do think that that is something that is common. I once was speaking with a client whom I helped to navigate and secure a diagnosis of autism. And we were talking about the differences. And I remember her saying People who are narcissistic care very much about what people think, and people who are autistic rather do not. And there's so much truth in that, in my opinion. But where I think it's important to offer a context for understanding both is around the concept of theory of mind. So that refers to, and I've got some notes, the cognitive ability to understand that others have beliefs, desires, intentions, and perspectives that may be different from one's own. So it is the ability to take someone else's perspective and to understand that someone's inner experience is different than your own. This is the ability to predict what someone is going to do and say. This is the intersection of cognitive and social development, if you will. And it runs parallel with empathy, and it is probably the underlying cognitive mechanism of empathy, but I think they're very different things. Theory of mind, in my opinion, is as much your own theory of mind as well as understanding someone else's. So, as you can well imagine, it is very necessary to navigate certain social situations. So this is interestingly also, it begins to take form all throughout childhood development. And it is at its most interesting and compelling point, I believe, when a child recognizes that someone can believe something that isn't true. So I think that's really interesting. How this This, of course, includes narcissism broadly, although narcissistic traits develop as a defense mechanism of the psyche. So, narcissism is the lack of differentiation between ego and self. So, this also begins early in childhood, culminates through the ages of 8 to 12, I would say. But again, that aspect of ego differentiation is happening parallel to the development of theory of mind, right? So this is where there is, where these two things co-occur. I think that this is one of the fundamental differences where autism is concerned. I think that it's unfair and unreasonable to make assumptions that folks who are on the autism spectrum don't have empathy, particularly cognitive empathy. Interestingly, it is exactly cognitive empathy that we try to help narcissists to develop. So, but it is that piece of being able to take someone else's perspective and that piece around empathy that makes the two things very similar. The focus on a particular subject or area of interest is, I think, another fair comparison. I think that's true for narcissists as well, but for different reasons. I think that people on the autism spectrum have a much more rich and interesting inner world. I think their ability to convey and communicate that is impaired, whereas narcissists have more of a void of an emotional inner world. So the self-absorption of someone on the autism spectrum is very different than that of someone who is narcissistic. But I think it's easy to confuse the two, right? Now, what I haven't done is a comparative analysis of if the two things are coexisting, but I, off the top of my head, don't think they are. And I spend a lot of time researching this. I, where there is a salient comparison is not so much in the individual, but in the person who, say, for example, may be in relationship with someone who is either on the autism spectrum or narcissistic. Because I think what you're likely going to find is that these are people who have a highly developed theory of mind and are highly empathic. So, to ground this a little bit more, if you grew up as an empath, or if you grew up not having your thoughts, ideas, your feelings, your experiences mirrored back to you, and if you kind of had to learn how to go it your own way with that, I think you are much more vulnerable to being attracted to and attracting someone who is on the autism spectrum and someone who may be high in narcissistic traits. The other strange thing is the early days of dating, if you will, or being in a relationship look kind of similar between the two. You know, you find someone who's very interested in you and they're very charming. And there can even be a similar devaluation and discard phase in a relationship with each, which I think is really interesting. Or at the very least, someone on the autism spectrum may lose interest or may feel like they don't have to work so hard. And it can really feel like they're cut off, like they don't care. They may have great difficulty seeing something from your perspective, offering a warm, empathic response when you're struggling. But I think that's really different than someone who's narcissistic, who may take almost a sadistic pleasure in your struggle, or who may use that as a bit of a power play, but you won't see that with someone who's on the autism spectrum. I think it makes a lot of sense to me that these two things can be conflated and confused. I think that it is a lonely place to be, whether you are with someone who's narcissistic or on the autism spectrum. I am using the term autism spectrum very, very broadly, but that is to use it in the way we are commonly referring to this particular type of neuroatypical presentation. I think that if it is deeply confusing for you, it can be very helpful to seek couples therapy, marital therapy, relational therapy with someone who is very familiar with both of those things, or even one of those things. But to have your partner agree to investigate that with you, I think can be very helpful, and get clarity, right? Get clarity about where someone's strengths are, where they're struggling, and where there might be a little bit of room for improvement. So I hope this has been helpful. Please like, subscribe, get in the conversation, fire off any questions. If you're comfortable sharing your experience, share your experience. Um, I'm always happy to come back to the drawing board when I have more feedback and information. So until we meet again, I wish you well.